there are no lost causes in the king's court. The Pharisees thought that the sinners were lost causes. They'll never ever be able to follow the rules. They'll never ever be able to wear the right clothes. They'll never ever wash their hands the right way. They were concerned with that, by the way. They're never ever going to follow the synagogue rules. They are lost causes. And Jesus, when he looks at Levi and he says, "Come follow me," was making a statement. No one's a lost cause. And I think a lot of you sitting here this morning, some of you might be thinking, "I'm a lost cause. You don't know my past. You don't know what I did to my wife. You don't know what I did to my husband. You don't know what I've done to my children. You don't know what I've done to other people. Maybe you're not married. You don't know what I've done to my boss. You don't know how much I've stolen. You don't know what I'm addicted to. You don't know. How could you possibly say that Jesus came for a person like me and you think you're a lost cause?" And what Jesus was saying to these Pharisees is, Levi's not a lost cause, you're not a lost cause. There are no lost causes in the king's court. And by eating with sinners, Jesus believes this: they can be transformed and they can be saved. Do you believe that about Jesus? Or do you believe you're a lost cause? Is that what's keeping you from the king's court? Your shame and your guilt? Because here's the deal. Jesus nailed all the shame and all the guilt to the cross. Your whole past, all of your sin, everything that you feel guilty about, everything that you feel shameful about, everything that you're afraid to admit, Jesus paid it all for you. And he says, "Come to my court. Experience real forgiveness." Third, the king's court is open to all. You see, the Pharisees had lost the mission that God had given Israel. If you remember in the Old Testament, or if you don't remember, what God said is, you're going to be a blessing to all nations. And you're to be an example to all nations. You're to follow these commandments. You're to worship me alone. You're not to bow down to idols. You're to love your wife, your husband, your family, your kids. You're to love your... And he went through all that law. Don't murder anybody. Don't commit adultery. Don't do these things so that people can see I am your God, the only God. And Israel, your mission is to show to the whole world my character. And they failed in that mission. And the Pharisees failed even more. And they had lost that mission that God had given to Israel. What they had done is they had closed the club off. They had closed the doors to the club. Has the church closed the door? Or are we open to all? Are we open to everyone who wants to hear about Jesus? Or do we have our limits? Are there some people that make us ask, like I asked, are these really the people that you've called us to? Really, God? The crack-smoking guitar player? The drunken husband and wife? The partiers? The hookers? The addicts? The bum? The bag lady? That's who you've called us to? The king's court is open to everyone. It's not a social club. I've often heard churches being accused of being a social club. A pastor shared with me this past week that he had a friend in seminary who was kicked out of seminary because he was addicted to pornography. And he was devastated. He had tried for years and years and years to defeat this addiction on his own. And it was a secret addiction. And when he finally let it out, the seminary tried to work with him and finally kicked him out because he just couldn't break it. He couldn't beat it. He went to the church for help, and the church didn't offer much help except for shame and guilt. And so my friend met up with his friend from seminary who had been kicked out. He said, "How are things going?" He said, "Things are actually going pretty well now." He said, "Well, what's the difference?" He said, "Well, I'm having some real victory in Jesus right now. And I mean, it's a struggle every day, and I battle it every day. But I'm starting to gain some headway." He said, "Well, what's the difference?" He said, "What church are you going to?" He said, "Well, I'm going to church, but that's not where I've received the help. I'm going to a support group. It's gospel-based, but it's a bunch of other porn addicts and a bunch of other sex addicts. And when I first went there, he said, I was disgusted. I couldn't believe that I was part of these people sitting here, that the stories that they were sharing and things that they were sharing, I didn't want any part of it. And I thought, I'm not this guy. And it took some time for me to finally realize, I am this guy. And he said, and as soon as I started to realize that, and Jesus was working in my life through that, and through the gospel, and showing me that I'm a sinner, as this was happening, I was finding more comfort with this group because there was no shame in this group. No guilt in this group. And when I went to the church, all I felt was shame and guilt. Why? Because the church has closed off the king's court. We don't listen to the very words of Jesus when he says, I came for the sick. I came for a man just like this.